No, it's fine. Hey, how's everyone doing? Welcome all. This is Priest Class, episode 3. We're coming at you hot. It's nighttime. Energy is good in the nighttime. We're drinking coffee. We're drinking alcohol. We're talking about video games today, and we're also talking about how they relate to St. Augustine's treatise, The City of Man and the City of God, but we'll get to that. So, Jared, I called this title, I called this episode Sim Tycoon, and 4X games. So, do you know what those three are?
A roller coaster tycoon, I know what that is.
You should get closer. Yeah, so you know the concept of a tycoon game, also like The Sims and SimCity, right? Like you're aware of like yeah, whatever. It's fine.
Turn the output up.
Okay. Gain.
I mean the gain up, whatever.
Yeah. Alright, so I have the gain up a little bit. Hopefully that's good. So essentially, a simulator game is a game that has to do, with emulating the conditions of the physics and the time, conditions of a certain situation. Gives you a realistic sensation of doing that thing. So there's like flight simulators, there's SimCity, Sim Ant. Sim,
yeah, the simulators, yeah. The Sims.
The Sims.
Yeah, the Sims.
Yeah. So
Sim World or whatever.
Yeah. And then you have Tycoons, which is kind of a branch off of that. It's a simulation of a business. You have Mall Tycoon. You have your water park tycoons, your roller coaster tycoons, your just whatever. There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of sim games. There's also SimCity, of course. Of
tycoon games. SimCity is the classic sim game. Now.
Oh wow.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot.
Well, I guess it's not just the sim games. It's all of the branch off titles.
Yeah. Yeah. We could really get into it. Now I was telling you about 4X, and you said you didn't know what 4X was, right? But I mean, you know what these games are. You just didn't know they were called 4X. But,
okay, well, I think I've heard of 4X as like a game company. I guess
it's not a company; it's a genre.
Oh, 4X. Okay.
So, what do you think?
Never mind. I think I was thinking of Y2 or what is it? 2K games or I don't know. Whatever.
Okay, so let's just search it here.
EA, fucking 2K or whatever. I don't play sports games.
Whatever. Before I open it, I just want you to. Okay, so it's.
Sound like a dumbass.
It's four words. It's 4 words that start with EX, that define the genre. Okay, so, like, I'll give you one of them. Explore. Okay.
Okay.
Can you give me the others? Just off the top of your head.
The genres of what?
4X. So 4X stands for 4 words. Explore is one of them.
Oh, explore. Examine.
I think so. Yeah. Wait.
Exterminate.
Yes. Yeah. Expand, explore, exploit, exterminate.
Oh, exploit. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so. Subgenre of strategy-based games includes turn-based real-time strategy. So it involves building an empire. Emphasis is placed upon economic and technological development, as well as a range of non-military routes to supremacy. Okay, so maybe like the most well-known version of this is Civilization. So currently we're on Civilization 6. The first one came out in 91. And it's like, it's pretty standardized at this point what the gameplay is like. And when I started playing this game a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, damn, this definitely warrants some kind of analysis of like ideological kind of conclusions that it's coming to, and also propagating, and it, like, you know, hypothetically training people to believe. So, and a lot of people would say, no, it's the other way around. People believe that, and that's why the game is that way. But
do people just believe that? Yeah.
I think that it might be the case that both people believe that already, and the game takes it as a given because it's made by people that believe it already. And so it's sort of a mirror of what the culture is already believing. So in that case, I guess we could place it in that soft category of priest class category, you know, of like content where
I definitely believe that, like, there's like what do you call it, that your entertainment is your programming, like, and it's like with everything there's New World Order propaganda and programming. There's social Darwinism. There's you know, this idea of like man being like, you know, pawns and tools, and exploitable to the whims of the kings, whatever.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, as a player in a 4X game, you embody the spirit of the empire itself, not any one emperor, but like the fucking demonic force that's possessing every single one of its citizens. You know?
Wait, what?
Like, okay,
it's not just like you order people around. You're also
it's not just like you're an emperor in this game, because it spans the course of the entire empire, which, you know, one emperor will never see one unless it's a short-lived empire. But also, it's not just
so you're like a god.
It's a god. It's a godlike place. And what are you commanding? You're commanding the direction of an entire nation or entire people.
What was that game? Fucking, oh man, what was that game like that JoJo played? It was on the Super Nintendo, and I think it was also on the Genesis. But it was like you were like an angel, and you'd go down. You'd like, it was a lot like Civilization. It was like early SimCity. Like it was like around the same time, because the original SimCity came out on the Super Nintendo too. But then there was this other game where like it was also like a side-scrolling game.
What?
But it was also like you would build
flashback.
You would build rudimentary cities, and then you'd fight off demons that attack the town or whatever.
Oh, I almost remember this now.
Remember what I'm talking about? JoJo played it. Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Vaguely, yeah.
What was that shit called? It was like this weird name.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so like, yeah. Let me try to get back to this.
Should look that shit up.
Alright. Hey, what up, Randy?
Hey, do you know what that game was called, Randy? That was on the Super Nintendo, and it was like it was a platformer side scroller at the same time that it was like a city sim builder, and you were like an angel in the sky, and you would like fight off the demons that attack the town or whatever, and like expand the territory by like lightning down into like a statue, and it would turn into like a person, and you'd go and you'd fight the enemies there or whatever, and like whatever.
Whatever, man. We can't find it. It's okay.
But anyway.
It's
the same concept.
Yeah. Oh, okay. He's looking for it. Appreciate that.
No, you don't have to though.
All right. So.
That's crazy. I've never played a Civilization game. That's hilarious that there's this game called.
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about it. So like I've been playing it, and I've learned a little bit about it. You start off as a settler, a group of settlers, and warrior and a group of warriors. So you have two units. You have settlers, a group of settlers, and a warrior. Okay, so just like the settlers can settle a city wherever you choose. Okay, and once you settle it, you can start producing things in that city. You can produce builders, which are people who just literally are like slaves, basically.
You can produce them?
Yeah, you produce builders in a city,
Okay.
and it takes turns. It takes a number of turns to produce them, and then once they're built, you can use them to turn the surrounding landscape into like useful things like mines or farms or dairy farms or fucking whatever. And then once they've reached the max number of like improvements they can make, they disappear. So it's like they die out of exhaustion. and you have to produce more builders.
How do you just produce them? That's crazy.
Yeah, you right click on the city and you hit produce builder, and it says it's going to take 3 turns, and then you wait 3 turns, and then it's like they appear, and then you put them to work. So like
So wait, are they going out as like slave catching like squads or whatever, or are they literally growing humans somewhere? Are they impregnating like the villagers or whatever?
That's a good question. How they're procuring the slaves. Okay, so the next thing to know about civilization. So you can also produce another group of settlers, right? Just like you can produce builders, you can produce settlers to go, and then once those are built, you can send those settlers out to settle a new city, and you create a network of cities, and the borders of your city-states soon expand and connect to each other and create this giant nation-state, okay? But that's only after like centuries of gameplay, which is like 20 or 30 turns or something, okay? And then the other thing that happens is you develop two different channels. You develop your civic route, your civic evolution or development, and your technological evolution or development. And you can think of the civic one as more like ideology.
That's interesting that it's like that's played out in turns like in chess. But
Yeah.
But you're just playing like the turns like no one out against no one. Basically.
Well, once you end your turn, the other players, which are the other empires on the board, play their turns.
So it's kind of like a more intricate game of like those board games.
Risk or something.
Risk or
yeah.
like what's it called? There's a whole bunch of them. You have a board that looks like a map, and you have like a whole bunch of different colored pieces.
Yeah, Stratego.
Yeah.
Fucking so. Yeah, it's a very intricate software board game basically that can do things that a board can't. But like, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, that's the thing. It's a board game. That's what I realized playing this. At first, and I've always, when I was a kid, I downloaded. I don't know how I got a hold of this as a kid. I think Dad got Civilization 3 as like a bundle as part of the computer that he got. That's why I had it, and I played it, and like I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and like I didn't get really far at all. But I remember like the sensation of like, this is simulating a real civilization, you know. And once you play, and when I downloaded Civ 6,
this is simulating a real civilization.
Yeah.
This is how real civilizations are
I'm
simulated.
an emperor, and I
Wow.
shall determine the best course of action. So Civ 6, when I downloaded the other sensation as well, at first, because it's cloaked in all of the verbiage and lexicon of like intellectual history, and of all intellectual traditions are mined for their lexicon and placed in this game. And so like, for example,
how would you rule the right way?
Yeah, we gotta watch the trailer. Oh, not just the trailer.
We gotta watch the trailer.
Wait, hey, Jared, was it called Actraiser.
Can you rule the right way?
No, there's
Civilization
literally,
6.
it's like, will you be a diplomatic force for good? Or will your culture, dominate the world stage? Yeah, there's 4 different ways you can win in Civilization. There's domination, which is military victory.
Your culture?
Cultural victory.
Wow.
Scientific victory. And diplomatic victory. So Randy said that it's called Actraiser.
Yeah, ActRaiser.
Actraiser.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so much. Yeah, ActRaiser. You should look that up and play that during your next music.
Yeah, okay,
session.
but
or whatever.
yeah. Anyway, yeah. So like.
ActRaiser. Wow, what a name.
Okay.
You raise the axe. Which is not like it's funny how axe plural sounds like the actual axe. Like they named the axe out of axe because it has 2 sides or something. It's like the axe plural.
You're freaking me out.
I don't know, man.
Let's see. 6. What is it? Like the tutorial video. No. Oh, intro. No. Narrator intro. I don't know. This is probably...
The assumption is that you as a king somehow actually control people.
Yeah, there's a lot in this trailer too, Jared.
Fucking assholes.
There's a lot in this trailer, okay? So we're about to watch it. We're gonna get the divine masculine, the divine...
You have the power of God.
The divine feminine, in the...
Being that you
watch,
can control
just shut
other
up, watch,
people's free will.
shh. Watch.
Is that what God
Pay attention. Oh, the baby-faced bride, and she's all like quirky. She has like a quirky DreamWorks expression.
And how will we know when we get there?
She's amused by his empire building.
That's what you gotta be if I can get the ladies, man.
Yeah, you have to build a gigantic statue of yourself. This music is pretty, I mean, there's some moments that hit in this, like, right?
What the fuck, yeah. Like,
Glory! Vanglorious, you know, like, the vanguard, you know, like, look at these warriors forging their path ahead in history.
by raping and privileging.
Yeah. And look, these 2 guys have nothing to do with the government are somehow wrapped into this story. If you accomplish some kind of technological feat, the government will write you into their story. Warfare is so cool.
Yeah, no, exactly. Warfare is so cool.
And then look, it goes from that apocalyptic scene
It is the nature of
to
humankind to push himself toward the
back to
all
babyface.
all that warfare built everybody up to being astronauts. Because of all that warfare, we built a
Face our
rocket.
fears.
And we went
Listen,
to outer
listen.
space.
We rise to the challenge
Oh, okay.
and become something greater than ourselves. A civilization.
Something greater than ourselves.
Something greater than ourselves, a civilization. So they're basically saying that the group is actually greater and more important than the individual.
Yeah. Wait, so... Official tutorial. There's this other video where the narrator, like, kind of says all the different ways you can play the game. Let's see. All right. Well, we're just gonna stop there. Okay, so basically, yeah. So this brings me to the city of God, or on the city of God versus against the pagans. It's written by Saint Augustine of Hippo in the early 5th century. It is written as a critical analysis of the decline of Rome, and it's his prescription of why Rome fell into decadence, what the nature of that decadence is, and he calls Rome the city of man, and he uses the city of man to refer to Rome, but city of man is sort of the categorical container of all cities that fall into decline, all civilizations that decline. He contrasts the city of man with the city of God, and let's look a little bit more into that, because I think what he uses to define the city of man is exactly what you find in that definition of a 4X game, which is exploitation, extermination, exploration, and expansion. So,
wow, exploitation and extermination. Holy fuck.
Yeah. Because he says that ultimately the city of God is founded on a common, or a universal, a universal devotion to the culmination of God's law, which is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. So it would be a society that where everybody is serving each other, and there would be no need for a state, there would be no need for anything like that, there would be no need for domination, there would be no...
Wait, how can everybody just serve each other?
Yeah, exactly. I'm simplifying quite a bit, but as opposed to the city of man, which is based ultimately on the value of the universal value of domination. And so it's domination versus interpersonal love, like a love for others. Okay, so I want to get more into it here.
But you're I think you're making a mistake there, that you're using a dialectic of like the two opposing sides being interpersonal, or what was it? It was
it is a
domination or love for and love for others, right? Domination and love for others, right? What does love for self fall in that?
That's the thing, is that the city of man is predicated on this love of the self above all, which is to say that it places the love of the self inordinately above the love of others or the love of God.
Well, the true love of the self is the love of others. If you have to say that to place low the self above the love of others isn't really true love for the self, right? They're just calling it that.
Here, let's just read this. Background. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 left Romans in a deep state of shock, and many Romans saw it as a punishment for abandoning traditional Roman religion for Christianity. In response to these accusations, and in order to console Christians, Augustine wrote The City of God as an argument for the truth of Christianity over competing religions and philosophies. He argues that Christianity was not responsible for the sack of Rome, but instead responsible for its success. For if the earthly rule of the empire was imperiled, it was the city of God that would ultimately triumph. Augustine's focus was heaven, a theme of many Christian works of late antiquity. Despite Christianity's designation as the official religion of the empire, Augustine declared its message to be spiritual rather than political. Christianity, he argued, should be concerned with the mythical heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, rather than the earthly politics. The book presents human history as a conflict between what Augustine calls the earthly city, often colloquially referred to as the city of man, but never by Augustine, and the city of God, a conflict that is destined to end in victory for the latter. The city of God is marked by people who forego earthly pleasure to dedicate themselves to the earthly truths, eternal truths of God, now revealed fully in the Christian faith. The earthly city, on the other hand, consists of people who have immersed themselves in the cares and pleasures of the present passing world. Augustine's thesis depicts the history of the world as universal warfare between God and the devil. This metaphysical war is not limited by time, but only by geography on earth. In this war, God moves by divine intervention, providence, those governments, political ideological movements, and military forces aligned with the Catholic Church in order to oppose all means, including military, those governments, political ideological movements, and military forces aligned the most with the devil, the city of the world. This concept of world history, guided by divine providence in a universal war between God and the devil, is part of the official doctrine of the Catholic Church, as most recently stated in the Second Vatican Council's something document. The Church holds that in her most benign Lord and Master can be found in her most benign Lord and Master can be found the key, the focal point, and the goal of man, as well as of all human history. All of human life, whether individual or collective, shows itself to be a dramatic struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness. The Lord is the goal of human history, the focal point of the longings of history and of civilization, the center of the human race, the joy of every heart, and the answer to all its yearnings. Okay, so
They're saying that all of that is in the city of God or whatever.
right. And so he goes on to talk about how so you know what, there's actually
It sounds like a fucking, it's like some fucking stupid fuck's dream.
let me play something that'll explain it better, and I'll play some music, okay?
Okay.
And then we'll wrap back around to civilization, because I have something to say about that afterwards. So it's called Literary Tales Podcast.
Well, what else? The city of God. We can build the city of God. All you gotta do is follow the king's rules.
No, it's not really like that.
And the king will lead you to heaven.
Have you heard of Paul Harvey's radio broadcast?
No.
Okay, well, apparently it's similar to what we're talking about right now. We'll check that
Paul
out.
Harvey.
Yeah.
I'll check that out.
I don't trust guys that have 2 first names, but
Dude, I've never met anyone named Harvey. Have you? First name Harvey? No way.
I'm gonna name my
That's a very
son
that's a
Harvey.
very unique name. It sounds kind of like a car, but it's not quite.
Uh-huh.
Like if in another dimension, there's a thing called a Harvey.
Well, there is it's called Harvey David, or Harley.
It's Harley. Yeah.
Okay, fuck.
No, but Harvey sounds like not quite Harley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome
Let's listen to
the
this, okay?
Philosophy Hour of Literary Tales. In this
What the-
episode, we are covering
Just
the
an
first
interlude. I'm gonna
half
play some music.
of Augustine's City of God, his critique of pagan Rome. Love is the central feature of all the writings of St. Augustine. All humans, irrespective of their state of grace, Augustine argued, desire to love and be loved. The role of love has a direct impact upon the political in Augustine's political theology, since humans are political animals defined by their
intentional?
Okay, well, I just unmuted the mic. Let's see if the mic is picking up. The mic is picking up. Okay. Alright, so we might be fine here. It's just like the desktop audio wasn't playing for a second there. Let's see if...
Hold on. Go ahead.
A mass society united in either love or lust. Augustine's critique of Roman culture as promoting the love of nothingness comes out most poignantly in his cultural criticism of Roman power and institutional structures, which subsequently inculcated
Okay, there it is.
a habit of love of nothingness within him, which manifested itself through a negation of fully living in accord
Should we
with
go
the
back?
Imago Dei. Augustine recounted his time being formed by the conventions and institutions of Roman society.
Yeah, let's just go back here.
Hello, everyone.
Stand by,
And
everyone.
welcome
Sorry
to
about
the
that.
Philosophy Hour of Literary Tales. In this episode, we are covering the first half of Augustine's City of God, his critique of pagan Rome. Love is the central feature of all the writings of St. Augustine.
What?
All humans, irrespective of their state of grace, Augustine argued, desire to love and be loved. The role of love has a direct
Okay.
impact upon political.
I gotta hear it too.
Augustine's political theology.
I'll get it.
Humans are political animals, defined by their loves. What people love.
I disagree with a lot of what this guy's saying.
Okay, we can discuss it.
The aim of politics and society, the very movement of our being. And this, of course, can have disastrous consequences based on what we love. The city of man, founded on its love of self, inevitably exhausts itself into the lust for domination and an ethos of coercive domination in false hope to satisfy the self. The city of man, therefore, is that, quote, city which aims at domination, which holds nations in enslavement, but is itself dominated by the very lust of domination. The city of God, by contrast, rooted in its love of God, leads to cooperation and a hopeful restoration of the harmony that had been lost because of the fall. As he charts out the two cities in the city of God, it becomes clear that Augustine's theology is also the first systematic form of cultural critique aimed at exposing the empty ideology and propaganda of Alta Moenia Romae, the high walls of Rome. This should not be surprising. Many scholars also recognize the critical project engaged in Augustine's work. Ernest Fortin noted the aim of Augustine's critique of the pagan political project was to unmask its vices. Peter Brown, the great scholar of late antiquity, likewise argued that part of the City of God was written to critically examine the hypnotizing myth of Rome. In analyzing, deconstructing, and unmasking the vices of pagan Rome, Augustine's political theology is primarily one of critique, in which critique served as the foundation to draw contrasts with. Therefore, Augustine's political theology is also deeply dialectical. Augustine made known that the city of man was characterized by its love of self and desire to satisfy its own disordered passions. The city of man, quote, was created by love of self, reaching to the point of contempt of God. To understand the city of man, which all humans are transient citizens of, we must ask the question, quid sit homo? What is man? According to Christianity's doctrine of creation, which of course Augustine will follow, creatio ex nihilo, the proper understanding of humanity is that humanity ultimately came from nothing. Humanity is only truly human when clothed in grace. The fall of man has stripped man of his grace, and he is now naked, as Augustine explained in the latter half of the City of God. Genesis, when it describes Adam and Eve as naked, Augustine reads this to mean not a physical nakedness, but a naked of that original grace which was granted unto them in creation. Apart from God, naked of grace, man is nothing. Man is, to put it mildly, and in grace is moved by the spirit of love. Stripped of grace and stripped of being united from God in Christ, love's negative reality is lust. So sinful man, rather than being a lover, is a luster. Lust is the negative reality of what a person is privated of love. Those who have read the Confessions would know how this is very similar to Augustine's understanding of evil. Evil is a privation of the good. Lust is the privation of love. To love only the self is to love what you are apart from God, namely the naked and domineering brute who has no grace covering him, and therefore no love moving in him. Therefore, the so-called love of self that is fostered in the city of man is the love of nothing, because it rejects enjoying God, and in the process rejects that self-emptying love and goodness, which serves as the groundwork for the harmonious unity of humanity with each other and with creation prior to the fall. Following the Augustinian maxim of becoming what you love, it is also true that the political comes to promote what its citizenry desires. Culture and politics subsequently inculcate what its citizens love through its apparatuses, institutions, and other structural systems, creating man's society united in either love or lust.
We give you more ways to
Augustine's
save on the fresh
critique
you
of
love
Roman culture
with
as
tools like the
promoting
Rouse app, where you
love
can find personalized
of
coupons
nothingness
on
comes out most poignantly in his cultural criticism of Roman power and institutional structures, which subsequently inculcated a habit of love of nothingness within him, which manifested itself through a negation of fully living in accord with the Imago Dei. Augustine recounted his time being formed by the conventions and institutions of Roman society, and remarks as to what kind of human Roman institutions and systems had made him. The educational apparatus of the late Western Roman Empire inculcated that love of self into Augustine. He would lie, cheat, and engage in flattery to win the praises of others who honored him as a role model, an exemplary student, as he explained in the Confessions. He stole from his parents to barter and come into possession of toys of his classmates. The rhetorician that he was, Augustine's command of speech was put to the service of slavery rather than truth, to get what he wanted and therefore control others in the process. His actions to win the praise of others were symptomatic of the self-love and self-seeking glory that Roman education instilled into him.
Wow,
And he also acknowledged that the educational system of which he was
really demonizing self-love here, huh?
Emperor of, led him straight from God.
What do you mean by self and what do you mean by love, right?
Appreciated the deep beauty therein. Augustine learned to weep for Dido, for her surrender to the sword, all the while he sank lower and lower in his own pit of despair. From this picture, Augustine understood that Roman education was shifting the blame of wickedness to the gods, or even to other human beings, freeing humans to engage in their base actions, which had already been willed by the gods anyway. Here, Augustine begins a long tradition in Christian theology that seeks to free God from evil. Evil is a product of human free will, and not God's decrees, as is implied in the Roman mythology and stories. In this way, the love of self and the self's desires to remain inward rather than serve others was justified through the texts and stories that he learned. Far from the humanistic education that Cicero advocated, of which Cicero identified moral collapse as the cause for the downfall of the Roman Republic and its terror, Roman education extolled wickedness and self-centeredness as the highest goal for one to aspire. Because Roman society loved only the self, Roman society loved nothing, and it aspired to nothing, and promoted this aspiration to its future generations. And the individual who best embodied this love of nothingness, in this case Augustine himself, was hailed as the great role model to others. Jupiter, then, is not punishing the wicked for transgressions, but simply out of a display of his own power and egotistical desires manifested through the display of his own power from Augustine's point of view. Jupiter does what Jupiter does because he has the power to do so. Moral guidance or the moral law factor not in Jupiter's activities. So too was this reality of domineering exploitation inculcated into the Roman Empire writ large and modeling itself off Jupiter Invictus Rex Caelus, Jupiter, the unconquerable king of heaven. This love of self, Augustine charged, was the reason for the existence of the Roman pantheon in of itself. The civic religion of Rome, like its education system, promoted the love of self so individuals could win cringing flattery for their actions in light of the approval of the gods. The civic cults only furthered the promotion of self-flattery and egotism above any higher truths or moral rectitude. As Augustine subsequently mused, if truth or moral fortitude was the aim of Rome, as its defenders often claimed, then why was there not a single crime, Plato? The Roman gods embodied immorality, corrupting the moral law written on humanity's hearts, and therefore sanctioning the wicked imitation of the false gods. As Augustine noted, the Roman pantheon promoted the free play of evil from among their own devotees. Roman culture
that's fucked up.
become the puppets of
He's like
moral
raping
gods.
her.
Yeah,
What was most disconcerting for
that's the rape of Lucretia.
was that he was formed and instructed to be one of those immoral puppets and joyfully and even willingly embrace that lifestyle for most of his early life prior to his famous conversion to Milan. One of the constant themes of Roman enculturation beyond immortality was the celebration of death. The Homeric epics, Virgil's Aeneid, the stories of Jupiter smiting the immoral with thunderbolts, all the while he engaged in immoral actions himself, destruction in some manner, the celebration of humanity's self-destructive impulses. Perhaps the most instructive and tragic example of this praising of nothingness or death was the rape and suicide of Lucretia, which was one of the most important founding myths of the Roman people. Lucretia's prominent place in Rome's mythological consciousness is that it was her rape by one of Tarquin's sons and her subsequent suicide that awakened the slumbering peoples of Rome, overthrow the tyrannical monarchy, and inaugurate the supposed liberty and prosperity of the Republic. Thus, Lucretia was held up as a virtuous heroine in Rome's founding mythology, which continued that process of inculcating particular self-loves for the people. Augustine began his commentary leading up to Lucretia's suicide as one on suicide more broadly. Therein, he concluded that suicide is not a viable option in dealing with the trauma and absurdities of life. Indeed, those who have read even Albert Camus and Friedrich Nietzsche will paradoxically and ironically see the influence of Augustine on their own philosophies of life and suicide. Suicide was the result of fear of punishment, shame, or guilt, which only becomes magnified by institutions and others in perpetuating that fear of punishment, shame, or guilt. Leading to Lucretia's suicide, Augustine was perplexed by the contradictory dilemma in which Lucretia found herself. Was she chaste, or had she committed adultery? As importantly asked, if she is adulterous, why
What the fuck?
is
Is
she
that her
chaste?
boob?
If
That's
chaste,
fucked up.
why was she put to death? For Augustine, the rape and suicide of Lucretia highlighted the moral depravity of Roman society and its institutions, and what it aimed for. Lucretia, from Augustine's point of view, had done nothing wrong, and yet, as a result of the predatory advances of a powerful prince, she ultimately decided to take her life, with the Romans who lionized her, cheering her death every step of the way. As Augustine concluded, it was the feeling of shame from defilement fostered by the body of Roman society which caused her to commit suicide. Her blood was as much on the hands of the Romans as it was on Tarquin.
She committed suicide after that?
Shame.
Yeah, and that's why they glorified
Culture.
her. That's why that was the moral of the story. Is that she was virtuous for saving face, for saving her honor, the honor of her family by killing herself after being raped.
For now being unable to live up to the Roman ideal of purity, which pushed her to her death.
They think that she should have killed herself because she was raped?
That was the most selfless thing that she could do, yeah. It's a celebration of death.
Ripped away from her because of another's foul deed.
That's fucked up.
Committed
There's no regard for the self whatsoever.
And as Roman,
What about her individual
and
life?
As a Roman woman,
Exactly.
excessively eager for honor, she was afraid that she should be thought, if she lived, to have willingly endured what, when she lived, she had violently suffered.
But yet they're gonna say that it's the love of the self that leads to lust or whatever.
Only because
It's the same
she
thing
killed
as lust.
herself, as Augustine muses, for having felt conscious guilt and shame. That guilt, Lucretia felt, was the coercive guilt of Roman society's self-love, pride, and purity that came with self-love and pride, which Lucretia had lost in her affliction.
Yeah,
As
we
St.
are.
Thomas Aquinas later noted, in a hopeless society, people die to avoid shame. To avoid the
Oh, I
shame
can
of
tell that
having
they're
lost her
saying
purity, Lucretia
Can you hear them
chose
now?
death because she had no hope. Had she not killed herself, Augustine's reflection implies, she would have been mocked and scorned by the same
hear it.
Romans
Can you
who
hear it?
eventually
Yeah.
celebrated her, only because she killed herself rather than live with the shame of having been raped. The irony of the story is that it encapsulated the Roman infatuation with power and death, and through the propaganda machinery of Roman education and embodied ethos, subsequently turned it into one of virtue and sacrifice. Lucretia had become the sacred outcast, though through no fault of her own, and paid the ultimate price for her defilement at the hands of another. She was innocent of the crimes which had caused her to choose death over life, but, more She was a victim of social sin and structural pressure, which had forced unto her that love of self and nothingness. When that love of self was stripped from her, having become objectified by Tarquin's son, who advanced on her for his own self-gratification, Lucretia had nothing left
Yeah,
to live for.
and they're saying
And
self-gratification
so
is the
thrust
same
sword
thing as self-love.
into her heart, with Roman society cheering her every step of the way. In Lucretia's story, we see the most poignant reflection of
No
Augustine's
way.
understanding of the libido dominandi, the turning of a subject person.
Yeah,
into
we
an
don't
object
tolerate
of
that
predatory
kind of language,
control.
Randy.
Augustine's reading of the rape of Lucretia is a damning indictment against social sin, structural power, and egotistical culture, which culminated in the
Nipples.
tragedy of Lucretia's rape and suicide. What is made all the more egregious is how blind the Romans were to this reality, cloaking everything Augustine saw through with the celebratory veil of virtue, only because it was not they who had suffered and died like Lucretia. In other words, better her than them. In Lucretia's story, one sees that coercive domination hard at work through social forces as much as through institutional and systemic forces. It was only through Lucretia's death that she won the self-honor and self-praise Roman society aimed for, but as an objectified thing. The pressures of Roman society, that self-love inculcated through Roman virtues and social systems, pushed Lucretia out of, not from her own doing, but by the foul deeds of another upon her, as Augustine so poignantly noted. In Lucretia's story, the ultimate self-reduction of the city of man based on the love of self, and only the love of self, is manifested. Everyone becomes an object to be objectified in the sight of the beholden, he who has predatory control and the lust to dominate. Augustine openly acknowledges that this is what happened to him. In seeking love and happiness, he sought after something to love. Therefore, it was only natural that he sought after things to satiate his desires. And so it was that Lucretia had become an object for Tarquin's son and an object extolled by the Romans after her death. Never was Lucretia a subject, a human being in the world. Never once was there a trace of seeing other humans as images of God made in love for love. The love of self reduces itself to either objectifier, becoming an agent of coercive objectification, or objectified, becoming the passive object of objectification.
That's a false dialectic.
Augustine saw the tragic irony of the fate of Lucretia. It was only in her objectification and subsequent death that she won the praises of the city of man, which is the ultimate self-reducing end of the love of self to the point of contempt of God. That love of self, inculcated and writ large, can only win praise by arriving at self-love's final end, death. Roman heroes, in Augustine's critique and reading, were only remembered for how they died or conquered others, never in how they loved and served others. Lucretia wasn't remembered for the purity of her life before her rape. She was remembered for what she did after her rape, her supposedly noble suicide, which is what the Romans extolled and praised her for. Likewise, Augustine doesn't spare the other great founding myth of Rome, the story of Romulus and Remus. Augustine immediately
How are they gonna honor
recognized
someone for being
that
raped?
The founding of Rome,
Yeah,
the founding
literally.
of
That's the
earthly
problem.
cities in the Genesis account,
Also, Romulus and
stemmed
Remus
from
is
the sin of fratricide.
literally
The murder of
a myth of
Remus by
fratricide,
his brother
yeah.
Romulus was because of the lust for domination that characterizes the city of man. both sought the glory of Rome's founding for themselves. This want for self-glory and self-honor led to the lust for domination.
Let yourself be raped in safe base, and then commit suicide because your purity was tainted.
This is how Rome
It's the right thing to
founded.
do.
When Remus, as Roman history witnesses, was slain by his brother Romulus. The difference from the primal crime was that both brothers were citizens of the earthborn of establishing the Roman state, but a nation would not bring to each the glory that a single brother would enjoy. As Augustine also poignantly noted, the founding myth of Rome is not only one covered in the blood of fratricide, but also internal division and filial division at that. For the city of man cannot be united, since love of self cannot bind people together. As Augustine says, thus the quarrel that arose between Remus
Again,
and
what self?
demonstrated the division of the earthly city against itself. One can see in Augustine's critique of the city of man that the city of man became what the human heart ironically desired, domination. The very machinery and institutional apparatus of the city subsequently embodied that ethos and inculcated it into society through its many systems. The political was entirely organized of leading to its debasement and self-destruction. Augustine's city of man, rooted in the love of self, is the worst aspect of what we might call a vile state, a base state, a despotic state wrapped all together in one aimless, coercive, and domineering city or society. Augustine's reading of self-love in the city of man is that it must necessarily exhaust itself in the pursuit of power, and it cannot be satiated until dominion is established over everything in the. Thus you get Rome, mistress of the world. After all, the founding myths of Rome, Romulus, Remus, Aeneas, and Lucretia, all involved death and domination. And that other great story of Rome, murder of Julius Caesar in the name of saving the Republic, was yet another repeat of the only thing Rome knew, that blood must be spilled for praise, honor, and liberty to be won. The city of man, then, truly is the city which aims at domination to try and satisfy the self. The love of self necessarily leads to a dissolved and dissipated body, itself a corrupted parody of the original condition of harmony, integrity, and mutual self-respect founded on common love, i.e. God. That common love which binds together.
I don't know what you mean is quiet, Randy, like the podcast that we're listening to, or our voices, or the music, because I can hear all three when I go and listen to it in the other room.
And so it is in love that Augustine's criticism of Cicero is most properly brought to light. Cicero and Augustine both agree that a republic is based on the common good, but Augustine understood that common good is an extension of...
Alright, tell me what you think so far, Jared, because I don't think I want to listen.
Every time they say love of self, they don't clarify what they're really saying, which is the love of ego self. And obviously, like, this is coming from somebody, or the writers, or somebody. Hold on one second. You should always turn it down when you're done. Go check the audio, just make sure to turn it down again so it doesn't do that. Okay. Yeah, he's making a lot of assumptions. Like, he's coming from the perspective that that God and man are separate, and that God is not in man, and that God is in man. Yeah, that like when we say love of self, what we mean is the love of the whole self, and when we say love, we don't just mean appreciation for and gratification of ego self into the body. What we mean is doing things that would benefit, like you would somebody who you love, for yourself. making like taking basic upkeep and hygiene for
why is
somebody
it-
for like as the person who's responsible for
Why is it that empires and
like treating yourself like you would a good
Yeah.
friend or a family member who
Yeah.
needs that care?
why is it that nations never do that? Like, or rarely ever do that? Because he's saying that the city of man, or like the earthly city, is characterized by the absence of that love of self in the sense that you say, which is a love of your fellow man, to love your neighbor as yourself. And,
Well, yeah, no.
like.
Yeah, but
Okay, well, like, loving yourself in the absence of loving your neighbor is a perfect definition for me of not only of, I guess, evil, but also of like it's a perfect description of our current
you don't
governments.
really you don't really love yourself if you don't
love your neighbor as yourself.
no yes, I mean, but no, like you don't have to love your neighbor, so you can't actually, you're not responsible for your neighbor, so you can't love your neighbor as yourself, but you can love your neighbor as somebody, as you can love your neighbor as you would want others to treat you. That's the saying.
Sorry, we didn't know that music was still playing. Okay.
But we can, yeah, come on, Sam.
Yeah, we're doing a new thing this time. It's a little rough, but
Sam's learning some new toys.
yeah.
But but there's difference between loving your neighbor as yourself, which is kind of misleading, and then the saying that you should treat others the way you would want to be treated, which is really what love at neighbors as yourself really
No,
means.
you're both are quotes from the Bible. Both are quotes from the New Testament. They're both teachings of Jesus, like straight from his mouth. So like he said, the sum of the law can be summed up as love God with all your heart.
The misconception is
mind, and
you're not
soul,
you're not responsible for your neighbor, but it's like that's where communists disagree.
Yeah, at some point. No, but that. Yeah, so you're responsible for your salvation, most of all. Yeah, I think that's
No, I mean
exemplified in the
you
parable.
can't actually make the decisions for anyone else but yourself.
Okay,
so you're actually not responsible for your neighbor because you can't make decisions for them.
Jared, responsibility is a weird word to employ in this conversation at this point, because we're talking about.
That's what a lot of people would assume by that saying.
We're talking about duty as opposed to
love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay, well, I mean, you're talking about like a sense of duty, like a sense of service or an obligation that you have, and that's not the kind of love I'm talking about. The kind of love I'm talking about isn't born out of an obligation. It's born out of the
and I don't think it's the kind of love this person's talking about either. Because what are you talking about? What kind of love are you talking about, Sam?
So the type of love that's inspired by God it's not.
Is it an act?
Okay, wait. What was the thing that I just said it wasn't? Fuck.
It's not. What do you call it?
So, love that's inspired by God.
It's not that you're responsible for.
Yeah. So.
It's not that you're responsible.
You're not
for.
obligated. You're not obligated. You are inspired by it. Like by the. You're inspired by the will of God. It's something that you are naturally drawn to, and so the difference is that the will of lust. Okay, so the will of love is inspired by God, and you're not enslaved by it. You are not enslaved by the will of love that's inspired by God. However, you are enslaved, very much enslaved by the will of lust which is inspired by the self, absent of God. The self absent of God is what he calls the self. Because the self in God, he calls, like, he calls the self in Christ or something like that, But the self absent of God is it absolutely enslaved.
It's the ego in the body.
And it's enslaved. It's compelled. It's obligated. It's endlessly obligated to serve. It's endlessly obligated to serve its own ends. So as opposed
not in its true form. Only in like an abnormal, like, cut off from its other part form.
As opposed to love, which is never done out of compulsion. It's never done out of a compulsion or a obligation, sense of obligation. Okay, it's never done like that. It's done as an act of an inspired act of God, and you know the difference. Just like when you do it, as opposed to being motivated by lust, which comes from the love of self absent of God. What actions motivated by lust feel like, they're not free. They're not truly free like actions in love.
Okay, I understand. Okay, look. I understand.
They're totally wrapped up in an addiction.
I understand this dialectic that he's saying.
They're wrapped up in this addiction to serving the self.
It goes back to what you're talking about with the intent of the law, or the intention. Like, the law judges your intention. Is like that. It's whether or not it's based in either of these modalities, which is the service of self being the service of the ego, or the service of a higher power.
Yeah, right, and that society takes on the form. The aims of society.
You don't think that? Wait. You don't.
Are the aims of society are the aims of what the collective are the aims of what the sum of the people in that society love.
Okay.
The direction of that society goes in the direction of what the sum of the people in that society love, and if the sum of those people love the self, absent of God, or as you call it, the ego self.
The sum of it's whether the individual does.
No, but like you're talking about, a collective goes in a general direction based on what the sum total of desire.
Yeah, but is. that's under the impression that that the individual isn't the one who decides ultimately. Like that it's like this person just decides because this person decided, and he's just going with the crowd, and not that these people are still making their own decisions.
No, but I'm
themselves.
saying at any given moment you could quantitatively.
Even if you're going with the crowd, you're still making a decision for yourself.
Okay, from God's perspective, at any given moment in time, you can quantitatively measure what number of the population is motivated by lust, which is the love of the self, and what number of the population is motivated by love, which is the love of God, and your neighbor is yourself. Okay, so like,
Sam, there's also this preconception that it has to be one or the other.
I know.
And it can't be both in balance. Because look, if you're under the assumption that the God and the devil exist within the individual, and that there's these two modalities or two influences or desires. There's the influence and desire of the love for self, which is, or the love for the ego self, which is, or the ego self in the body, which is lust, and then the love of the higher self's desires and will, which is love. But what's not to say that you can't do actions that are in line with both? Like when you when you brush your teeth, that's like a hygienic thing that you do for yourself, but it's also in line with God, because you need to upkeep a good hygiene in order to do His work. Or like when you learn a new skill, or like when you make a friend or whatever. There's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
You do for both.
I think that
they're both in line.
Yeah,
they serve both wills, and it's not just that when you're doing something you're serving one or the other.
Okay, so this gets into Augustine's definition of evil and definition of lust, which the podcast talked about how they're both very much related, because his definition of evil is the lack of good, and his definition of lust is desire that lacks love.
Okay, yeah. So it's this idea of the masculine and the feminine again, and it's the one devoid of the other, which isn't its true nature. It's like an abnormality. It's like there's
no, because the masculine and feminine is not an abnormality.
There's the toxic feminine and there's the toxic masculine, right?
But okay, well, we're talking about positive. We're talking about negativity, which you're saying is necessarily feminine, because the feminine is negative and masculine is positive. I don't know about that, but I want to say that like they are different things. For example, like, you know, in the Hermetic principles, polarity is the principle of negativity and positivity, but gender is an entirely different principle. So they're not exactly the same thing. So like when we're talking about, you know, evil exists along this axis of value, you know, and good is on one side and evil is on the other.
You're saying the value, and you're saying like the value of the ego, self, and body, purely like on one side you have the value of one devoid of the other, and then on the other end you have the love of one devoid of the other. So is there an example of on the other end being so like toxically in service of God that you forget your body and you end up like, you know, like starving?
Yeah, you know, the early church. There's have you heard of the Desert Fathers, which is coincidentally is going to be the name of fucking like doom metal band? Desert Fathers. You know, this is really interesting. So yeah, you're talking about asceticism, yeah, and specifically like kind of mystical asceticism, and also known as monasticism. Oh wait, whoa. Oh, okay. I was like, what? Okay, let's look at early Christians. Early Christian hermits, ascetics, and monks who lived mainly in this Seti's desert of Egypt, beginning around the 3rd century AD. So there's a book called The Sayings of the Desert Fathers that comes from this time, and because you're talking about the imbalance of being overly spiritual and not earthly enough, not grounded.
Yeah, because, exactly. There's
enough.
A balance that needs to be struck. Otherwise, you're out of balance and you're missing the point.
So I think games like Civilization depict a world much like our own that's desacralized, totally what's it called, void of spiritual value, and therefore it's just dominated by the 4 X's.
Well, yeah, and it's materialistic.
Yeah.
Material is all that exists, and like the whole, like what man has accomplished in the material realm is
so that's
is all there is to civilization.
Yeah, so I guess you would call that the negative feminine, and then here or the negative version of
masculine, the negative masculine without feminine, without the feminine.
Without the feminine? I thought, okay, no,
because there's no non-aggression.
No,
here
we go. No, that would be the negative. The world you're describing would be the negative feminine, because it is a world where.
It's both.
No, because
there's the dominators, which are the toxic masculine, and then there's the people who allow themselves to be slaves because they think it's honorable.
Okay, fine. Well, I don't know, but. I don't know exactly.
That's the toxic feminine.
But there's the world that is, it's interesting because so it's like there's the dialectic between the city of God and the city of man, and the city of God is supposedly good, but the city of man could very much resemble a city of God, because, for example, it could be like worshiping like sort of like a false conception of God or like a false spirituality, and the church fathers, I mean, that's not exactly what they were, but like there's definitely this thing about how they went too far in the direction of spirituality and of like asceticism.
Well, same thing with the Buddhist monks, right?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
They're like, your desires are evil. And it's like, well, wait a second. Your desires are also part of who you are. You're kind of like cutting your arm off and like abandoning a part of yourself. And they're like, you have to take the whole psyche. Like, you have it. And you can't just assume that part of it is just evil and out to get you. It's just that there's this concept that things have a proper place and they have an improper place, and in their improper, and when they're not being used properly, they become there's like, what's it called? There's this concept of the oppressed returning as the oppressor. It's like this thing that happens. It's like a law of psychology that like,
the return of the repressed.
The return of the repressed as the oppressor in your life.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's a side of you that's been abandoned and rejected and punished and as a result, it's not just gonna go away. It's gonna lash out as a personality, like a personality that's pissed.
Yeah. Right.
But also, and then there's this thing called possession. If somebody has a weak will, the oppressor comes and possesses the person to destroy themselves or whatever, or to, like, you know what I mean, like punish themselves for punishing the oppressed or whatever, like coming and possessing somebody to punish themselves for what they've done to themselves.
Yeah. Let's watch this for a little bit. Just to kind of round this
Can you build a civilization that stands the test of time? That's what Sid Meier's Civilization asks of players when you first boot it up. It's a message that first appeared a long time ago, in the murky bygone age of the mid to late 90s. Back then, one of the most popular kinds of games was a genre called 4X, and those 4 X's stood for Explore, Expand, Exterminate, and Exploit. These games saw you controlling one empire or species of many in a large world, competing with other players to make the biggest cities, the nastiest armies, and the cleverest boffins. The problem was, you could play 100 different imitators of Master of Orion or Alpha Centauri back in the day, and you'd find the same patterns cropping up. There was the faction that was good at war, one that had a powerful industry, and one that made lots of food. Your choice of faction is the catalyst for all the other choices you make over the course of a strategy campaign, and probably the most important one of that. It defines not just your strategy as a whole, but also an aesthetic inspiration for your decision making. And if the factions are all the same or near enough in your games, then you're likely to be making only cosmetically different decisions no matter which game you play. Sid Meier himself says that good games are a series of interesting decisions. The validity of this quote when it comes to video games as a whole is oft debated, but we can still apply it to his own games. Is choosing to go to war because your faction is slightly better at war than everyone else an interesting choice? No, probably not. Eventually, people just kind of got sick of this sort of thing. When every 4X offered the same experience with a different license or setting, without much different going on under the hood, things evaporated, and the 4X genre all but collapsed. For better or for worse, Civilization, one of the oldest 4X franchises, is one of the only ones left. Civ managed to ride out the 4X extinction by having...
They leave out all the mind control they have to do to people to get them to fucking go to war, too.
But now that it's the biggest and oldest...
Like, they leave out the propaganda.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
In recent years, however, the 4X in one form or another is seeing a slow but steady rebirth.
They sure do. It's
distance themselves from civilization. For example,
Here, watch this.
I'll be taking a look at how these new games handle factions, specifically how they tackle the long-term and political decision-making upon which the genre is built, but also how they prevent each gameplay experience from being the same every time. See, in older style 4X, Civ included, the problem was that not only were these factions often superficially and strategically similar between games, the design philosophy of simply having some of the factions be better or worse.
I think
in
this
certain
has
areas
something to say
meant that
about
they little
what
more
we're talking
qualifies
about,
on the
because,
same
like,
gameplay experience. Sure, I can research technologies a bit faster and get more faith. as
you
a
know, you have to
player in
ask, like,
Civilization
why,
6, but I'm
like,
still playing essentially
what
the same
keeps
game
the
as
city
Western
of man
Rome.
going,
Our
or like
strengths
what
may be
keeps
different,
the
but
what
our
keeps the
priorities
evil
are the same,
empires of the
and our
world going?
interactions with other
You know,
players
like
usually
Because
aren't going to
people
depend on
because
what
people
faction they're
need
playing,
parents,
just if they're strong
or have been
weak
tricked
allies,
into
or
believing
if
that they
have
do,
what you want.
for
It's
generations and
serviceable,
generations and
but I can't help
generations.
but think of it all a bit.
So there's like a
First in the game
Problem
to
reaction
look at
solution,
is endless
or like the
legend.
Yeah.
like the Ordo out of KO.
It takes
You
place on
create the
planet
prop. You
America,
you
where a
create the
variety of
marketplace
races
for
battle
your
out the
service,
Osmodons of the planet. It's
and your
standard
service
warfare.
is protection from the invisible enemy.
Is Amplitude's approach to designing these factions.
yeah.
The invisible enemy is generated by them,
For example,
because they
these
control
guys are
the
necromancers.
chaos.
Well, here's where
Like,
the
they're a race
enemy
of horrible bug
is
monsters that exist in just
created
about-
out of a sense of
Let's take a look at their
factionalism,
abilities.
or like
Okay,
the idea that, and what he's going to talk about here, is that what makes one of these 4X games really interesting is when different factions that are competing have wildly different abilities and flaws and things like that, because it makes the strategy for each one so much different, and it makes the dynamics of the whole world map gameplay just like a lot more chaotic and as opposed to the Civilization series that no matter what faction you play as, there's really not that much variation. Like it's really kind of boring compared to like some of these other 4X games, and like I think that kind of says something about the world. About what immediately came to mind was the story of the Tower of Babel, how mankind had fallen, and together they were still unified but fallen. It seems like that was like that was the condition at the beginning of the story, because with their unification, with their power of unity, you know, they created a structure that was contesting the authority of God. And God reacted by scattering them across the earth with different languages so that they couldn't.
That sounds like some extraterrestrial alien shit.
Yeah, basically confounding them. I don't know if he scatters them, but he confounds them into different speaking different tongues, and then in that way it creates a natural factionalism of the nations, and like that continues to this day.
Because the people were unified, they were like.
But it was
remember, it was like the gods, and it's plural. And this passage was talking about this. It's like they refer to the gods as the plural term in the original translation or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like the gods looked upon them and said, "Look what they have become. Like nothing will be impossible for them soon." So they went down and fucked them up, pretty much. Like they didn't want like they'll rise up against us. Basically, kind of thing, like that's what wasn't being said there. It was like oh, the humans are figuring out how to work together and build like their own their own tower, or whether you know. What I mean?
I guess we gotta read the Tower of Babel now. The Leaning Tower of Babel.
The leaning tower. The leaning tower of Babel.
Okay. Everybody's
It's in France, right?
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's favorite French icon. Alright. Let's just read.
It's funny how much the Tower of Babel also kind of looks like, and reminds me of like the tower card of the tarot, and it's being struck by lightning.
Yeah. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach into heavens, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad, and from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city.
They stopped building the city.
And they left off to build the city. Yeah. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So yeah,
fucking asshole. What a fucking asshole.
What, you think that man should?
I mean,
you think
whether it was extraterrestrials or if it was Yahweh, that's a fucking dick move. That's like a higher power that's like burnt. That's like a child that burns an anthill with a magnifying glass.
Jared, do you think that humans should be able to should be able to have the power to do whatever they have, like, in their wicked hearts to do?
Should they have the power?
Should we be all fucking omnipotent?
That's an odd question.
Okay.
Should they?
Okay, like fucking.
I would think the question would be, do they? But should they?
Jared. Obviously, we're not in our current state. We don't have the power that's described in this. We don't have a unified consciousness, or like, we don't have a species that's working in concert. Like, we don't have like a sense of like collective action that would totally forego the need for government.
Well, you assume that man is just inherently wicked, and that if they built a city on their own, it would just be wicked. It would just be a wicked city.
No, man devoid of God's grace. Like,
you mean God? You mean man devoid of the grace of the extraterrestrials that confounded their language?
I don't know why you can only.
Or God. Yahweh.
You can only think of God
who confounded their language. Wait, are you referring to, like, when you say God's grace? Are you referring to the same God who did this to people, who fucking like confounded their language and stopped them from their project?
He was saving people from doing something like irreversibly terrible, probably.
Oh, okay, probably.
Yeah, you think that man would be cool and fine to be basically godlike?
No, I think that man already govern themselves, with either poorly or.
This isn't about governing themselves. This is about being gods.
They weren't trying to be gods.
He literally said, "Fucking." And nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. That's omnipotence. That's a godlike power.
Meaning that, together we could accomplish anything.
Okay, Jared.
So if man was united, we could build and manifest anything we wanted.
Okay, but Jared, this is clearly an illustration.
That's not saying that we're all God, but yeah, it is like saying, like, the individual is God over himself, but united with others under the same will. Not under like a higher power's will, but cooperating voluntarily, and unified under the same project.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It in the right context, it's a beautiful thing. That's the thing, is that what the key distinction is what the object of their will is. If the object of their will is the love of God and the love of one another as themselves, then that's the kingdom of God. But if the object of their will is to advance their own, basically like their own domination over other people or over the environment, and also their own exploitation of pleasure, or like their own acquiring of pleasure, you know what I mean, like this sort of just like hollow pursuit. So yeah, it's just like the Tower of Babel, I think, is an example of a people, because I mean quite literally God isn't there when they're doing it. He like comes upon and sees them.
According to the story, like we're supposed to believe, yeah. Like it's painted under the lens that men are wicked, and that like, and it's leaving out like this
is what God does.
I think there's much more to the story of the Tower of Babel than the biblical story. There's like there's many fucking different versions from different like cultures that tell about the same event that happened in history, and there's probably a lot more to it than what the Bible is telling us about the wickedness of the fucking, you know what I mean, whatever. I'm not saying that the Tower of Babel and that Babylon wasn't like full of wicked people. Okay?
All right, let's just read what Randy said. Okay. I'm listening.
I'm just saying that there's probably more to the conditions of that city than just the wickedness of man. There's more. There was way like the Bible sums it up as just the wickedness of man, which is like kind of
Augustine would elaborate.
Augustine
would elaborate to say that the
obfuscation and
Augustine would elaborate that the wickedness of man is you can characterize it or define it as like an obsession with the self.
Who gave man money and government? Like obviously those were given to man in the beginning of like way back to when the beginning of civilization. There was always this thing called money and government, and it was given to us.
Oddly enough, the Bible doesn't have anything to say about that.
What?
Oddly enough, the Bible doesn't have anything to say about that.
I mean, yeah, it's like it's we're just supposed to assume that those things just came from the wickedness of man's heart.
No, not necessarily. It doesn't have anything to say about it, so it's not good or bad necessarily. But like Genesis has a lot to say about creation, but what happens is that like after they're kicked out of the garden, that's when human society presumably begins with the children of Adam, the children of Abel, and the children of Cain and their other children, and like that's when government and what was the other one?
Money and government.
Yeah, money and government came into being because they just start being referenced after that. Government in the form of like tribes, which are just like groups of families.
Monarchies.
No. In the early Bible, in the very very early history of mankind, as said in the Bible, it's like they're like tribes of man. Like they're like tribes are like groups of families that are led by patriarchs who have a lineage of.
There's a such thing as like natural leaders because that's what hierarchy is.
Yeah.
People who know how to do things better.
So
they're going to be followed by those who want to learn from a teacher. You know what I mean? Like that's different than a monarchy, right?
Whoops. All right. Do you want to read what Randy said?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So. It's this misconception about the nature of man. I almost think that this is Randy. I almost think that the Tower of Babel story could also be a metaphor for the unification of souls, and then the divide would be like the ultimate divide of the unification of souls. Confounding the languages could also be like forgetting unification in order to forget we are the one consciousness. If you knew for certain that you were everyone, it would get boring. Unification would be useful at a time. We could build amazing structures, but it would get tiresome, a hell even. we would eventually want to forget. So yeah, this is sort of like the idea that we like
That
we
it'd be boring?
determine we determine our own destiny, life after life, that collectively and individually, that life is a huge adventure that we're just like, you know, like joyfully, pleasantly, exuberantly, like with gestalt, you know, like doing like almost like a Nietzschean Superman, like we're just like almost like masochistic, like somebody else said this, like masochistic phoenixes, you know, just dying to be born again, you know, like so like that's one conception.
That mankind
that souls that all
souls inherent innate desires is to like run the life like a car until it dies.
Yeah, but on a cosmic scale, it's a endless cycle of
like race to your death, basically. Like soul, you're saying that the nature of a soul is to race to its death.
Yes, and because the accumulation of, you know,
but again,
yeah,
referring to the nature,
where
it's this false conception that the nature of the self is in the nature of the ego self's desires, and not including
what I'm getting at,
not including God as part of the self, basically, and thinking that God and the self are completely separate, and that God isn't in man, and that that God's desires are not man's desires.
Yeah, but you know what I'm getting at is that this sort of masochistic phoenix vision of the cosmic dance, Kali Yuga, fucking, you know, whatever you want to call it. This endless birth and rebirth, birth, death, and rebirth cycle of souls. That vision of mankind to me, you know, that's a vision of hell to me. It's a vision that's static. It never breaks out of a dialectic. It you know what I mean? There's thesis and antithesis forever, and that's a really sad idea for me. And like
yeah, it is. It really is.
Yeah, so like the and also it's a glorification of death, like you said. It's racing to death because death just means the reinitiation into life. And like, you know, what do you really have to lose if there's never an end to this, you know? So the alternative.
What do you really have to lose if there's no end? You're saying.
Yeah, if there's no end to it, you can just always hit. It's like a, you know, it's like
you're
like having endless lives.